So I wanted to, first of all, do you guys have anything you want to discuss real quick before we get into today's session? Anything going on out there that you need help with right off the bat?
Money.
Morning, hey Ben.
I said we need money.
Oh, I thought you said morning. I was about to say, well, I don't know where you are. Maybe you're in Hawaii or something, Japan or something. Yeah, don't we all need it? All right, so I wanted to have this call today, and this kind of I was gonna hit on a different topic today, but this kind of came to the forefront during an IC call that I had yesterday with an AE, and I felt like I needed to address something with our wider AE community because I know sometimes this process can be fairly frustrating. So I really wanted to approach this topic from kind of a real life example. I think what I'm finding, and a lot of it happens, a lot of it I'm coming across during the course of conversations with you guys throughout the week, and on Slack or what have you. I think we need to kind of take a step back from the business acquisition process and kind of look at it from a 30,000 foot view, because I think a lot of you guys are getting into the weeds before you need to get into the weeds, and I think it's slowing you down. So part of what I wanted to do was to kind of walk you through my acquisition process when I purchased a $9 million manufacturing company. This has probably been about 18 months now ago. And I kind of want to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's I don't know if it's worth congratulations yet till I kind of reach the end goal, but to get through the process was rewarding from that standpoint. But I wanted to kind of walk you guys through kind of what I did and how it relates to the process, and how to quickly get through the process and get to the point where you can get into the weeds. I don't think you need to get into the weeds early on. And I think you guys are spending too much time trying to analyze the numbers and break them down before you even get an offer on the table. And I think sometimes you're putting the cart before the horse by issuing these LOIs where you don't have enough knowledge in place to issue an LOI, and why go through that process and waste your time up front. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to see, I'm going to say this because I've told a number of you guys this before in the past. I'm going to show the tools that I use to buy a business are probably going to be a little bit different than what you're going to use, just because of the nature types of businesses I'm looking to buy. They're not geographically constrained. And I think the tools that you get through Acquira are more suited to what you're looking, or more suited for your acquisition purposes. And I'll say this, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I mean, you're going to see most of my tools are self-developed. They've been self-developed over my career, and they're based on how I think about acquisitions. They're not necessarily based on how you should be thinking about them. They're not based on, maybe textbook examples of what a model should look like. I just have things in my head that I like to put down on a spreadsheet or on paper, and it may not comport with how you think about these things. So I don't like to, if you see my tool, don't ask for it. I'm not going to give it to you because I don't want, one last thing I want you to do is depending on a tool to answer your questions, and it doesn't even fit with kind of your mode of thinking. And then I don't want you coming back at some point and saying, well, Rich, the tool told me this, and that this was a great deal, and I looked at it and analyzed it through your tool, and I got screwed. And that's why, number one, I don't like to give away my own personal models. I can give you guys shorthand versions of them, and you can adapt them to whatever you want, to however you want to use them, but you're not going to ever get like my full model, because and eventually the main reason too is I love you guys, but eventually you guys are all going to be successful in this part of the space. And who knows, who's to say that, I won't come up against you in a deal, not an acquirer type deal, but maybe you guys expand your horizons and you start buying, manufacturing companies, or, you start buying value-added resellers or distributors and those types of businesses. And all of a sudden we start running into each other and competing in the marketplace. And all of a sudden you've got my proprietary tool behind you. So you kind of get into put me at a disadvantage. Not that that'll happen, but I am always thinking like that.
Hey, Rich, before you start, I do have some questions real quick. Are you A8 certified, and are you going over the EPA licensing and manufacturing and ISO 9000 and 14,000 license for running the business?
So in answer to those questions, I would defer those to my general manager partner. I don't get involved in the day-to-day operations. I'm more or less financial management for my companies. That's just those are my strengths, and part of my strengths and my weaknesses. I have a little bit of a manufacturing background, but I'm not an operator from that standpoint. I depend on a couple of different partners to operate for me, and they're people I trust that I went to school with, or I played football with, or what have you, that have some of the similar backgrounds. So they're not like just some off the street person running these businesses. So I can always point you towards one of my partners if you want to have that conversation, but it's probably not a necessity from that standpoint. But they are from that standpoint.
And so you're an owner investor instead of an owner operator.
Yeah, I'm not much of a, that's
understandable.
Yeah, that's probably not my strength from an operation standpoint.
Right. You work on the business instead of
in the past.
operating.
I'm a deal junkie for the most part. I like transactions, working on transactions, and then passing them off to someone else. That being said, let's kind of jump into the topic. I'm going to take you guys through a step-by-step process, and you guys probably take some notes because it'll kind of speed up, or at least get you to think about some things when you're kind of sourcing deals and dealing with brokers. One other thing I wanted to point out. So I know you guys, and this is going to stay kind of in-house. We're probably not going to be advertising this, but I know a lot of you guys come into this, come into Acquira, and the main businesses that we talk about are home service type businesses, and those are the ones that we principally invest in. What I will say is that we will also consider some manufacturing operations now.
And then okay, I'll put it. You want to wait for the other ones?
We will consider some small scale manufacturing now. At this point, Chris, who runs the equity fund, also has an interest in manufacturing. Has a definite, his preference are defense manufacturing, aerospace manufacturing, but he'll look at any kind of manufacturing type opportunities that make sense. Also, obviously, we'll do the fabrication for like roofing companies and metal, whatever, all the normal stuff that we talk about around home services. If there's a fabrication unit or fabrication business around that, we're interested in those. I think you guys know that. But so we are getting a little bit more into the manufacturing space. It's on a one-off case-by-case basis, so I wouldn't, go solely looking for those. But if you come across an interesting opportunity, definitely, we probably would consider that from that standpoint as well. Now let's get on to the topic of choice here. Let me share my screen here. All right, I'm going to start off with PowerPoint. All right, let me drag this over here so I'm looking at you guys. Oh, not that one. Can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I want to talk about this. Obviously, we talked about me buying a $9 million manufacturing company. All of what I'm going to walk you guys through in some form or another is in the Acquira training. So I basically use the Acquira model to buy this business. So I want you guys to really place a premium on that training and the training material in there. I find that some AEs try to take shortcuts. They don't do all the training. They skip over steps. They try to jump right into offering for business without even necessarily getting through a lot of the training. And that's fine. And I'll always tell you guys, don't delay looking at businesses, or don't put businesses aside while you're going through the training. You should be doing that in conjunction with your training. Some of you have been around long enough to where you've probably gone through all of the training at this point that you need to go through. Because there's additional training beyond, getting from point A up through LOI. Then you've got the last mile training, what have you. That stuff is kind of like on the back burner, and that'll be kind of like in part 2, part 3, or whatever, as we get through this training. Sorry, let these people in. So don't discard the training and think that it's not useful, because it very much is. Now, the training, a lot of times people say, well, the training is around home services and that's what you deal with. No, you've got to be able to kind of step away from looking at it from a home service basis and understanding how it applies to multiple industries, because it does. It's not just for home services. Home services are used as the examples just because that's kind of been our sweet spot. And as I've told a number of you, probably over the last couple of years, that's our sweet spot now. That doesn't necessarily mean that'll be our sweet spot forever. If we find the right partners in the right industries, we could, move over into other industries. And that's starting to happen now with some of the manufacturing side of the businesses in terms of investing there. So you can kind of see kind of the morphing of that. So, and the training will adapt to that over time. But for now, take yourself away from thinking that the acquisition training is strictly regarding, home services, because you've got to be able to take those concepts and apply them across different industries. All right. Let's get here. So step 1 in this process, and most of you who are part of my cohort that I coach, the first thing that I send out to you guys is an investment thesis template for you to put down on paper what your acquisition strategy is and what the criteria is around that acquisition strategy. So step 1 is, and don't skip over this. People always want to skip over this part of it. When I was looking, when I myself, and I'll tell you kind of how my acquisition plan / investment thesis came to be, even though I have 2 different partners, it's still my investment thesis. They're like kind of a participant in my investment thesis / acquisition plan. So when I sat down and decided what I really wanted to do, I realized, especially coming from my background and working with private equity firms, or working at a private equity firm, they even start with an investment thesis. I mean, a really highly defined investment thesis that kind of lays out what the strategy is and why the strategy is what it is. So really sit down, because this is going to be your guiding document throughout your acquisition career. And if you guys don't take the time to do this, you're going to find out down the road at some point, when you're looking at your portfolio, you're going to have a hodgepodge of investments that don't really mean anything to you. You can't sell it as a portfolio if that's ultimately what your exit is, or it becomes difficult to run because you've got so many, odds and ends in this portfolio that, you've got to kind of jump from one hat to the other. And it just doesn't make sense. There's no congruence around the portfolio. When you're investing,
where can I find that piece at? Because I'm part of your cohort and I don't know where exactly. Is that on Slack or what? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I should have, on our first call, I should have sent it out to you. If I didn't, hit me up on Slack and I'll send you that template.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
So I took a look at the sample investment thesis that was sent over,
Uh-huh.
and one of the questions I've got is that seems very broad brushed and very general. I mean, I understand that it's supposed to be, because we're supposed to be tailoring it to our specific concerns.
Mhm.
But I mean, I'm used to looking at investment theses or things of that nature that are much more comprehensive. I mean, we're talking 20 pages. Are they not supposed to be that big, or they're supposed to be just a couple pages? What are we supposed to be doing in our particular circumstance?
So what I'll say is I kind of alluded to that when I talked about working for a private equity firm. They did have probably a 30-page investment thesis for the industries they wanted to attack and why at each vertical. For your purposes as an individual acquisition entrepreneur, it doesn't, unless there's a compelling reason for it to be 20 pages, and there's a lot there that you just want to dump on paper. It doesn't need to be that long. I would say your investment thesis should really be structured around kind of what's your strategy and why. So when I say define your acquisition strategy, what's the end goal for your portfolio? What are you really trying to accomplish? So let's just, from my perspective, when I wrote this, and then we'll kind of keep jumping back and forth and using me as the case study here. From my perspective, when I looked at kind of what I wanted to do, the first thing I thought about were what industries do I have an interest in, and why. And I wanted to spend some time on what my strengths and weaknesses were. So when I see one of the bullet points on here is a SWOT on yourself. Okay, what was my background? What are my strengths and weaknesses? What can I bring to the table for the type of business that I want to buy? Which kind of help me kind of define what I do want, or what I don't. So when I thought about myself, okay, when I look back in my internship career, I have an accounting background. I was a former CPA. I worked as an intern for a manufacturing company when I was in college over the summer, a medical device manufacturing company. So I learned kind of manufacturing to a certain extent because I had to account for all the inputs and outputs on the financial side. So I learned a little bit about manufacturing. So I felt like I had a natural aptitude for it. I actually loved it. So that was one of my strengths. But one of my weaknesses was I didn't actually work in operations. I really had no interest in working in operations. I look back on my career, kind of what I'd done in investment banking, the types of businesses I worked with, or the types of clients I'd worked with with those specific industries. And so I was able to kind of put two and two together as to kind of where my strengths and what my weaknesses were and what I could bring to the table. So one of my strengths was financial. Well, I'm a very finance-oriented person. I understand financial management at the corporate level. I understand how to basically do operational finance. I understand how to value companies. I understand how to deal with people to a certain extent. I knew what my big picture strengths were, but I also knew what those weaknesses were. I wasn't interested in managing day-to-day operation and dealing with Sally and her problems, and I didn't want to deal with Doug and catching him smoking pot or whatever and dealing with the implications of that. I didn't have an interest in dealing with the day-to-day stuff. Also, within the business itself, I wasn't necessarily what I would call a strategy person. I understood it to a certain extent, but my real strengths were more planning and having someone who could deal with strategy, someone who could, necessarily, a person that was really well, strengthened in the sales and marketing end of the business. I didn't have those strengths. Okay. So when I'm thinking about what I bring to the table, I have to consider that with the type of business and the type of opportunity I'm looking for. So my first thought was, okay, I want a business with a management team in place already. I want a business maybe with a partner who has operational experience and who wants to run the day-to-day operations of the business. I want to make sure that I have people on staff that are already well-versed in sales and marketing, that sort of thing. So, I necessarily limited the types of businesses that I was going to look at based on those strengths and weaknesses, okay? And then my acquisition strategy around that was to acquire, number one business in the manufacturing space. Actually, I have another business, but that was more of what I call a sideline test investment to a certain extent. But my idea for this particular manufacturing company was to use this as a platform company to grow, to basically buy other small manufacturing companies at some point. So this is kind of the platform company. My end goal is to build a portfolio of contract manufacturing companies and to hold that portfolio over the next 15, 20 years and grow it. And then at some point, I'm going to exit to a bigger player. That's kind of the end goal. So with the end goal in mind, I understand kind of how to develop that strategy and the steps along that and the types of companies I'm looking for. Does that all make sense to you guys?
Yes, sir. It does.
Okay. All right.
Can you
So,
spell out SWOT for me? What's the OT?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it's just a basic metric matrix that you develop either around yourself or around a company where you're really examining the strengths of the business in terms of what they do well, or the strengths of yourself, what you do well, the weaknesses of the business or yourself, what you don't do well, and what the business doesn't do well, the opportunities, where can you actually go out into the marketplace to take advantage of those opportunities, or to find those opportunities that match your strengths, and or if you work on those weaknesses, where do you think you can where do you think you can find those opportunities based on the working on those weaknesses that then become strengths. And then the threat side of it, where's the competition coming from? Who could blow you, for either personally or at the business level? What could take those opportunities and turn them into weaknesses and thus allow you not to compete. So for instance, your threats in a normal business are going to be your competitors and what they're doing. What are they doing that you're not doing? Are they coming up with innovative products and services that your company isn't? And how do you thwart those threats from that standpoint? So it's just basically a matrix of like a 4-box matrix that allows you to kind of do some analysis on a qualitative basis on either a business or yourself from that standpoint.
So Rich, should we be working with you like as we work through this process ourselves, or should we go ahead and put together an investment thesis and then you can take a look at it and then we can have a discussion about whether it's going in the right direction or it needs to have updates? How would you like us to go through with that?
So typically, again, with my cohorts, I typically will send out that template and then have you guys take the initial stab at that. And I'll review them. I've always offered to review them once they're done, once they're completed, to give you my thoughts. Sometimes it's just more or less oh, this looks good. There's nothing glaring there. But if you want to have a deeper discussion about it, yeah, I'm willing to do that as well, to help you guys formulate that and to make sure it kind of matches with who you are and kind of what that end goal should look like. Now, some of the template itself that I've been sending out doesn't necessarily have the strategy and end goal in there. So you can add that. It's basically around, because it kind of came from just helping us get on the same page with the AE. It more or less just came, it came together under the auspices of, hey, let's understand exactly what the AE wants to buy, the criteria around buying the business, and kind of what they want to do with the business once they buy it. And it's really not really an in-depth thesis as we just talked about. But I would say for all of you guys, guys should start with the end in mind, okay? Because the end will kind of dictate what you do at the beginning of the process and how you kind of grow and manage that portfolio down the road. All right. So that's the first step. So within that thesis, you're going to come up with your strategy, your acquisition strategy. You're going to come up with why that's your acquisition strategy. You want to understand your why, as they always say. You're going to do a SWOT on yourself, and then you're going to build your criteria around kind of what your strengths and weaknesses are and your interests. What types of company products and services or industry you want to jump into. What types of customers you want to deal with. If you have a business that has blue collar customers and you're not a blue collar person and you don't want to deal with blue collar folks, and you plan to be involved with the business, then maybe you shouldn't be buying in that industry. So some customer bases are going to be a little bit tougher to deal with than other customers. So you want to understand, you want to understand what type of customers you want to deal with, company size, which are just, number of employees, revenue, cash flow. What do you think you can handle? Both from a, what I would call a financial standpoint, as well as a personality standpoint. Okay. So think about that. And then company culture, if there's a company culture that you would prefer to, work with, it's almost the same thing, synonymous with customer base. If you want to work with, people that are white collar people, professional people, that have a certain type of, culture, you can do that. If you want to work with, blue collar folks that have a certain type of culture, you can do that. Sometimes the culture crosses over. You could have a white collar culture, but it's a poor culture. They have poor work ethic, or you could have a blue collar culture that it's got a tremendous work ethic. That's a great culture, and everyone gets along well. Company culture doesn't have anything to do with blue collar, white collar. I'm just kind of, I guess, trying to make the example, but whatever. You want to find a company culture that comports with who you are. Now, there's going to be situations where you're going to find a business that looks great on paper, but the culture is garbage. And that's where, working with somebody like Brian from ACE can kind of help, change that culture over a period of time. Sometimes you're going to come across a business that has a great culture already in place. So you can't completely dismiss a company that has a bad culture, but you have to consider, do you have the patience to actually change the culture? Because that can be quite difficult. All right. Especially if you're planning on keeping a lot of the key employees in the business. All right. So we've gotten to step one. You guys all understand this now. I think this is the most important aspect of the process, because this will allow you to kind of speed up the process as you start to screen deals. Okay. If you don't have this on, you're going to end up, and I always talk about this on my cohort introductory calls, you're going to end up going from acquiring, let's just say, HVAC companies, and then you're going to get, to all of a sudden you're going to be, bringing me chicken farms. Because you have no direction. Okay. And the idea is to keep you focused to get to your end goal. And if your end goal is to own a string of, own a bunch of chicken farms, well, okay, that might be perfect for you. But if your goal is to own, a number of HVAC companies and eventually exit from those, or continue to hold them or build whatever, an HVAC empire, then if you're all of a sudden buying chicken farms, that doesn't make sense. Okay, and it's diverting your attention away from your ultimate goal. So let's go here. Step
Hi,
two.
Rich.
Yeah.
This is Shelly.
Hey,
I have
Shelly.
a question on the acquisition strategies. So I've been hearing people talking about building portfolio or etc.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some other examples of acquisition strategies?
Okay, so your acquisition strategy is going to be built around two issues. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would say this. Are you going to be industry specific or agnostic to the types of businesses you're looking to add to your portfolio? And a lot of that depends on what your end goal is. If you're interested in doing a roll up and then exiting that roll up to sell to a bigger private equity firm, or I don't know, even if you have the desire to take your portfolio public or what have you, then you're probably going to have more of a strategy built around acquiring businesses in the same industry, whether they be horizontal acquisitions, which are businesses, the same types of businesses in the same industry, or there's a vertical strategy where you're buying businesses in the same industry, but they may be in different, they may be supply, you may have an HVAC company, and then you buy an HVAC supplier or an HVAC manufacturer. So they becomes, you're buying along the supply chain. So that's one strategy you want to consider. Okay. That's whatever strategy you ultimately decide to go. If you go to a wider portfolio, portfolio strategy, which is more agnostic, where it's got a permanent portfolio for you and your family over the long term, you can kind of be a little bit more, you can be a little bit more broader in your approach. Those would be, your exit strategy is going to be a little bit more difficult, because you're going to have to essentially break up those companies within the portfolio in order to sell them, because no buyer is going to want to buy kind of a conglomerate, so to speak. I mean, those kind of went out of style in the 70s. So you have to think about kind of what your end goal is around the ultimate ending for the portfolio, or, like I said, if you want to pass it on, you might be passing it on, but that's going to dictate kind of what your strategy is, or how your tactical strategy around acquiring businesses. Now, that's also going to dictate kind of how you structure your portfolio. So if you're deciding that you're going to do a kind of a roll-up strategy, well, you may want to have, you may want to acquire a business, as a platform company, and you might want to basically do a tuck-in strategy or add-on strategy where you're adding businesses onto that business, and you're growing ultimately that single enterprise. Okay. But if you're gonna have a wider portfolio strategy where you're acquiring multiple businesses in different industries, maybe you have a holding company structure. And a holding company structure is simply you have one holding company at the top, okay, that owns different subsidiaries, different companies or subsidiaries, whatever you want to call them. And then within that holding company, they're sharing resources, whether it be accounting, HR. So your holding company actually will have like all of your overhead that will be helping manage those businesses in terms of you'll have your direct managers of each of those businesses, but at the same time, in order to save on costs, maybe you have one accounting, your internal accounting team is going to handle the accounting for all of those companies. Your HR person will handle all the HR issues. Your holding company is essentially the bank for all of your individual companies, meaning they'll send you proposals to fund as far as growth initiatives or what have you. So you basically become the bank and allocate capital and loan those companies funds. And obviously you have a banking relationship that you're pulling from at a holding company level. So it's a little bit of a different strategy. So it's basically permanent versus what I call permanent. When I say permanent, I mean like generational permanency versus kind of more of a longer term play where you're building for an eventual exit.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.